wonderful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and all the countries, and listen to
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us for the first time here for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, on top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning shows we've aired here on Dialogue Houston, but particularly your ideas for guest topics and subjects to be covered in upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on HCC TV, proudly now into its 32nd season. We have a great show planned for you this afternoon. It's something I wanted to make sure that you knew about, that the citizens and the audience of HCC's TV Dialogue Houston had a chance to make sure we avail ourselves of. And it's going to be a great eye-opener in some ways. It talks about the great work that Mayor Turner has been doing with his complete communities. And to help us kind of understand and walk through all of this is Shannon Buggs, who's the director of the Mayor's Office of Complete Communities, will tell us all about communities and what's being done. But the whole idea here from the inception is bridging the gap between equity and opportunity. And I think that's really the context of why we do what we do. And let me just stop there, introduce and welcome Shannon, and let her kind of take it, and then we'll go into some of the particular aspects of the work. Shannon, welcome.
Thank you so much, Larry. It's really great to be on the show with you. Thank you for inviting us. We had a great week this week with the release of the One Complete Houston Understanding Our Equity Challenges and Opportunities report. That is the result of years of study of looking at equity indicators about how Houston is doing in addressing the historic inequities that are, well, identifying really, not necessarily addressing, but identifying and acknowledging the historic inequities that have been happening in our city that have led to the present day disparities.
So let's back up and kind of put in context the Complete Communities whole idea and movement started initially with 5 communities. We've now added 5 more and 10. And tell us how that process has gone and why we chose those neighborhoods.
Certainly. So when Mayor Turner was inaugurated, he gave in his inaugural speech his reason for wanting to be mayor, for having run 3 times in order to lead this city. And the main thing was he did not want to be the mayor of a city that was divided, a city of haves and have-nots, a city that he had grown up in that had represented to him as a young person that there were some people who were going to have things and there are going to be others who will never get to those same things. And as hard as he has worked and as much as he has done to level the playing field for himself, he was still, as many of us, facing lots of inequities in our city. And so when he came into office, he launched his Houston Complete Communities Initiative to push forward with economic development in some of our city's most underserved and under-resourced neighborhoods, while not displacing the people that live in those neighborhoods. It is an overall initiative meant to improve the overall quality of life for people in those neighborhoods, one of which he grew up in. He grew up in Acres Home. There are 10 of them. I grew up in a complete community, the Fort Bend, Houston area. I now live in the greater 3rd Ward area, which is another one of our complete communities. We also have Sunnyside and Alief, Westwood, and Gulfton, and near Northside, Magnolia Park, Manchester. So Cashmere Gardens, it runs the full gamut. And in fact, 1 in 6 Houstonians live within the boundaries of a complete communities.
And the idea of complete community, as you just said so clearly, is to identify those gaps, identify the inequities and inequalities and why they exist, and what can we do to solve and resolve some of them, and in partnership with a lot of other people and
Yes.
organizations in those communities and neighborhoods to help us. And I think that's been part of the beauty of One Complete Houston, and bringing a lot of people to understand of what's the issues are, how can they help, how can they be supportive, and what each one of us can do.
Exactly. The issues that have surfaced in those neighborhoods didn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's decades and decades of neglect, of just ignoring the population there, of systemic decision-making that undermined the quality of life there. We have story records of seeing landfills and incinerators, trash incinerators, placed in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods in Houston at a disparate amount to undermine the quality of life of the community. Those neighborhoods were not considered as important as other neighborhoods. And so we as a city sent our trash there in the 1910s and 20s and continuing into the 70s and 80s in a lot of places. And so this effort is to stop taking an incremental approach to addressing those disparities and to go all in. And the only way we could do that, because the city of Houston, of course, lives under a revenue cap and is not able to use nothing but public funding in order to address this. The effort is a public-private partnership to get our corporate citizens to step up and provide donated funds, our philanthropic community to provide donated funds in order to leverage public funding for us to draw down more federal funding, to draw down more state funding in order to address these inequities.
And what the report showed so clearly is that, as you mentioned, it is a public-private partnership, but everybody has a role to play in kind of rethinking what we're doing and how we're doing it, including some city policies and procedures, business strategies, corporate environment, social and governments, philanthropy, investment models, nonprofits' role. So it's a little bit of everybody and everything, as you mentioned. And that's what's so important, to look at what we're doing, how are we doing it, what return are we getting from those investments, and how can we do it better? And I think what I heard so clearly on last Tuesday morning was that as we rethink all of our strategies and opportunities for change, that we need to really do it in a more creative, perhaps, way, in a more looking at the long-term. Philanthropy plays a big role in that, and how they can put more money, invest more money. But I think it's more than that. It's really, as you said so clearly in the presentation, we all need to kind of look at what do we want in this transformation. And it really is about people having an opportunity to stay and live in their neighborhoods and be afforded every equal opportunity as any other part of the city.
Exactly. MacArthur Genius Award winner fellow, Majora Carter, has a book where the subtitle is to live in a better neighborhood, you don't have to leave your own.
Right.
And that is at the heart of this. Mayor Turner grew up in Acres Home, continues to live in the Acres Home area, and he is now mayor of the city of Houston. That community has never received the same type of economic development attention or capital investments as other parts of this city.
Has always been the stepchild. Has always been the stepchild.
But that stepchild neighborhood has
Right.
produced one of Houston's most dynamic mayors ever.
Right. Great things come out of the fofo.
Great things come out of the fofo, out of Sunnyside, out of A-Leaf, out of all of our neighborhoods. And that is part of the challenge here. Our collective prosperity as a city cannot reach its maximum potential if all of our neighborhoods are not thriving. This does not just impact the residents of those neighborhoods, it impacts the entire city. We have a stark example. Just yesterday, Mayor Turner made an announcement about the work that's going to be done to help relocate the residents in Cashmere Gardens and Fifth Ward that live above the creosote plume.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
that's horrible.
It has been connected to a cancer cluster. But Kathy Bluford Daniels, one of our removed from office HISD um, trustees did make she's a resident of Fifth Ward. She is someone who has been fighting to bring attention to this issue for a very, very long time. And she shared quite courageously yesterday that her own husband is battling cancer now.
Yeah.
Well, one of the points that she made was that we haven't done enough to check the children of these communities for the impacts of this cancer cluster that they're living in have had on their ability to learn. And we know that Wheatley and Cashmere Garden High School are two of the high schools that have been singled out for low performance that led to the takeover of our HISD school system. The fact that you could have that plume there for a very long time, very little information to know about the health. We talked yesterday about a child who died at 13 from leukemia. All of this has allowed an environmental injustice to exist in a community that has had wide-ranging impacts, not just on the quality of life, but literally on the entire city. When we look at those schools being triggers for what happened with our takeover. And we don't know if there's a whole connection to that or not, but we haven't taken the time to try to find out.
Right.
And so part of what we are doing with the equity indicator study is to bring attention to the fact that there is data that exists for us to know just what is happening in our city that is lowering the quality of life for everyone. We know that the urban heat island effect is something that we are all equitably experiencing.
Maybe the only thing we're equitably experiencing.
Right. And Dr. Dan Potter from the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University did a presentation on Tuesday when we released the report. And he said, equity is very different from quality. Just because we're all experiencing something doesn't mean that we all should be experiencing that thing. Right. And so we as a city need to be tackling the issues that are impacting all of us and uplift the overall standard of life for everyone. But then we also need to give particular attention to the equity indicators that show that the people who are most socially vulnerable among us are carrying the brunt of the burden of dealing with outsized challenges. We
have examples in Houston all around us all the time. I mean, that statistic about infant mortality rate in certain neighborhoods in Fifth Ward and others, higher than some third world countries. That one always got me. The one that really gets me is that depending on which zip code you live in Houston, from a health perspective, you got a 20-year difference, 20 years, different life expectancy from just the zip code down the street from you to your neighborhood over here.
Yes.
And we've known that, we've used those statistics, we've said that for years and years, and yet something doesn't quite click as to looking at what we can do to do that. And we always want to respond to these things with charity, which is a great response downscreen after the fact thing, rather than going upstream and doing the proactive stuff and look at and address the issues that's causing all this stuff to start with, systemic change, eradication, policy changes. But that's the hard work, that's the long work. And most people don't want to do that. And yet we say these statistics, they roll off our tongue very easily. And yet then we just go on and move to the next thing.
Well, I have to say, Larry, on that one, you are absolutely right. We have known the statistics and it is past time to do something about it. And I have to say that in this administration, we have been.
You have, the first one to address it, actually.
Well, I think everybody has taken an incremental approach, and Mayor Turner has said, no, incrementalism doesn't
work. That's what I'm saying. Incremental is not gonna get us there.
We got to do a big approach. And I think one of the best examples of that is our COVID-19 response.
Yep.
Stephen Williams, as director of the Houston Health Department, from the earliest days was pushing forward to do more in our underserved and under-resourced neighborhoods. Mayor Turner was pushing to do more in those neighborhoods. Mayor Turner appointed the Mayor's Health Equity Response Task Force, appointed me and 4 other directors in the mayor's office to lead that effort to make sure that our COVID-19 response, although the Houston Health Department had to do a citywide response, that there was a strike team basically put into place to very specifically work in the complete communities and 17 other neighborhoods that we had identified as being particularly socially vulnerable and more susceptible to having fatal outcomes from COVID-19 if the disease were to spread in those neighborhoods. And so that's where we did our food drives. That's where we took the testing. And when we got the vaccine, the city of Houston was able to make our case directly to the Rockefeller Foundation and was the only city to directly receive funds from Rockefeller in order to do vaccine demonstration here. And the other cities, they did the same thing, but they worked mostly with nonprofit partners. Because we were already working with our nonprofit partners, the city was just as intimately involved in that work as others are coming from an NGO status. So with all of that, we know that Houston could show progress in making sure that Black and Hispanic and Asian communities were getting the vaccine in timely fashion, right, alongside with our white neighbors.
Mhm.
That was important, but we would not have done that if we had not already had the data in hand and said we were not going to just sit idly by and let that just continue to happen. And I think it shouldn't take just those types of massive global health crises and emergencies to get people to act. I think the beauty of the One Complete Houston report is that everyone can read that and decide, these are the things I'm going to work on personally to make sure that we're having a more equitable Houston.
So going forward, as we look at these priorities and we look at these endeavors, as the mayor said, it's going to take more than just one administration. It's going to take continuous working on it by next administrations. It's going to take, let's see, Mayor Turner's the 62nd mayor, so the 63rd mayor will be working on this, the 64th mayor into the first year of her second term will be the one in 2036 to be in Discovery Green, talking about how we have accomplished and achieved some of these things by then, which is obviously our 200th anniversary of the city of Houston in 2036. So we kind of lay that predicate out for the people following Mayor Turner to accept the gauntlet and the challenge and to continue that work. So tell us before we run out of time, because it all goes too quickly, about this wonderful equity indicator study and how we are doing with it and how we did within that context and what yet needs to be done.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you to Shell USA Incorporated for funding the study. Shell deciding that Shell is one of Houston's most prominent corporate partners and has been for decades. People still call it the Shell Tower, even though it doesn't carry that name any longer, because of the prominence of that company in our city. And for that company to decide that they wanted to tackle the issue of equity alongside Mayor Turner's administration says a lot, because we are in a climate right now where there are a lot of people pushing away from diversity, equity, and inclusion and trying to characterize the work that is being done to make our city and our state and our country able to live up to the true dream of true equality. They're undermining those efforts by demonizing the work that's being done to ensure that equity is taking place. There are folks who have needed more for a long time who need to receive that more. And there are others who have the most who need to be in a position now of sharing. That's what equity really gets down to, right? That we put our resources where they're needed most, and fairly distributing them to everyone. Because that hasn't worked in the past. And we can't start at one point and say, well, now everybody gets the same. And people are still existing with deficits that have never been addressed. So with this report, we are working alongside Shell in order to make sure that we as a city know what the benchmark is and what we're trying to move forward from. Our number of 44.1 puts us right in the middle of other cities that have done the same report, same study, using the methodology that the University of New York think tank there had developed. And it also gives us a roadmap forward as to where we need to prioritize pushing forward on addressing the major area of concern. Again, Dan Potter, when he did his presentation on Tuesday, had a whole chart that showed us where those major areas of concern are, including the maternal mortality rate in Texas, and specifically in Houston, which is higher than any other place in the country. And that is something that we've been addressing through our health department. We also saw that traffic fatalities are inequitably happening in Black and Hispanic communities. And we know that our Vision Zero plan to eliminate all traffic fatalities by the year 2030 is one of those strategies that we're already putting in place to address those things. Illegal dumping happens. We talked earlier about the fact that we as a city had systematically put landfills and incinerators in our poorest neighborhoods. And we are using our One Clean Houston initiative now to address illegal dumping and to push forward on righting those environmental injustices that happened decades ago. We are developing the old Sunnyside landfill, 240 acres, sitting right in the heart of the Sunnyside community, next to the Sunnyside Park, across from the school, abutting the library and a police storefront, former police storefront. All of that sitting right there in the middle of the community. The city of Houston is developing that into the nation's largest urban solar farm. And so we know that there are lots of major steps that have to move forward. It's not just policies and procedures that have to change and practices, but it's a lot of putting our capital dollars where our mouths are and doing the work to attract more investment into these neighborhoods by addressing the environmental issues that are there and bringing about and catalyzing additional investments from others.
Well, I think it's a great roadmap. It's a great way to look at this work that needs to be done. And I'm sure collaboratively with all the players involved, it's going to happen. But it's going to take time, so it has to continue as Mayor Turner leaves office with the next administration and the next administration, after that even. But let me see if I can recap real quick kind of how I see all of this stuff.
Sure.
I was really inspired by your presentation and Dan's presentation of the study. And I spent a little time since then kind of looking at some of the aspects of it. And I think it boils down for me for three simple points that I want to make. The benchmark issue in question is so important. It's imperative. One of the ways we've talked about that benchmark question over the years, I mean, going back to Kathy Whitmire's days as mayor. What is the fair, moral, and ethical treatment of all human beings? What is the fair, just, moral, ethical treatment of all human beings? What would that look like? What would that look like if we tried to establish that benchmark? Just a bare benchmark of equality across the board to that question. Because it also asks the second question and third question that goes with that. And all human beings' lives matter. All human beings are equal. You can't really have that discussion on the latter two until you kind of decide what that first one looks like. That's one thing. So the second piece I take now into the equity piece. I've always thought about equity as one of those things that the road to equity is through empathy. The degree of equity that one has, the ability to have high equity, is proportionally directed toward the empathy question. The more empathy you have, the more equity you have. And how do you get empathy? You get empathy by relationships, by knowing other human beings, particularly those different than myself that does not look like me. Houston has a great challenge in that we are the most diverse city. We're also the most segregated city in America. We're also the most gated city in America. So relationships become important. Relationships that are nurtured, developed, and maintained on mutual trust and respect, because nothing happens without trust.
Yes.
So we got to develop our relationships more across the board to raise our level of empathy. By raising our level of empathy, we'll raise our equity proportion. And lastly, And you and I know this because we've talked about it off and on in different ways. It came up in different ways on Tuesday too. I'm convinced more and more as I watch things happen and unfold in Houston, now some 50 years. Mayor Turner's my 8th mayor that I've worked with or for. That helping people just to survive never was the goal. Getting people to thrive is so important, but that's still not the goal. The goal is flourishing. How do we get human beings to flourish? Flourish to the fullness of their God-given potential. And how we do that is the ability to afford them every opportunity they need to do that. Every roadblock, everything that's in their way, everything we can to assist them in their opportunity to flourish to the fullness of their God-given potential. That's why I think this program, this roadmap that you've laid out, this equity indicator study with all the different components, gives Houstonians something that we can all look at together and kind of grasp together and decide that this is components of this I can do, certain parts of this I can get involved in, certain parts of this I have the skill set to help make some of this happen, and volunteer those services to the city and to the community. And so it's an exciting time. And I applaud you and Mayor Turner and all that have worked diligently on this for the last few years to get us to this point where we have something perhaps we can grasp together as a community.
I think this, because this equity indicator study achieves goal 12 in our resilient Houston strategy of advancing equity for all, I think it gets to what you just described, Larry, and that is to getting us from resilient to flourishing. I think that's what the basis of the work is. And I so appreciate you putting it that way.
Well, I'm going to continue to do my little piece on this because I'm excited about it. I've always been. Well, it fits in everything else. I mean, these are not isolated things. I mean, when we did the police reform study, all this fits together.
Yes, it does.
You have to have the holistic approach. All right, they tell me I got to get out of here. We're out of time. I want to thank you, Shannon Buggs, for being part of this today. Remember, she is the director of the mayor's office on Complete Communities. You can reach her there. You can get the study that we refer to off the URL site, which is it on your email, or is it on your website, or is it on Kendra's website?
It's on ours at houstontx.gov/1complete-Houston.
There we go. That's what I wanted. So go ahead and download it, study it, and mark it up and decide where you fit in and what you can do. Got to get out of here. Until we come back together, as always, be safe, be well, and peace, power, and love.